the cradle of civilizations. You find yourself drifting back, far back, to a land the ancients called Mesopotamia. The very word means the land between rivers, and here, between the winding Tigris and Euphrates, the first cities in human history take shape. The year is lost in the mists of time, but you know this is long before the memory of your ancestors, thousands of years before your own world. The soil here is rich with silt washed down each year by floods, and from that fertile ground humanity has coaxed its earliest harvests. Barley sways in the fields. Goats and cattle graze on the banks of canals. The people of this land, who once wandered as hunters and gatherers, now dig irrigation ditches, plant crops and build villages that slowly transform into towns, and then into cities. You walk along dusty roads lined with sun-baked bricks. Towering ziggurats rise their stepped platforms, reaching toward the sky meant as bridges between gods and mortals. The air smells of clay smoke and bread. Priests in long robes chant hymns to gods whose names you can just make out: Enlil, god of the air; Inanna, goddess of love and war; Nanna, the moon god who watches the night. This is Sumer, the world's first urban civilization. Each city here is a world of its own, a city-state ruled by its own king, surrounded by walls to keep enemies out. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Nippur. Names carved into clay that survive even after thousands of years. Their kings rule not only with armies, but also with rituals, sacrifices and offerings to the gods, for in this world, religion and power are inseparable. As you drift through this landscape, you realize something else: these people have invented writing. On clay tablets, scribes carve wedge-shaped symbols with reed styluses. This script, called cuneiform, preserves lists of trade goods, prayers, royal decrees, even the oldest stories humanity has told itself. Here the first libraries are born. Here history itself begins. But Mesopotamia is not a place of peace. The flat plains without mountains or seas for protection are vulnerable to invasion. Armies march from city to city. Chariots rattle across the ground. Spears glint in the sunlight. City-states feud endlessly, each seeking dominance over its neighbors. In this cauldron of rivalry and ambition, the story of one man will rise above all others, a man who will build something the world has never seen before. He is not yet born, but whispers of destiny already stir in the winds. For beyond these Sumerian cities lies another land, Akkad, to the north. While the Sumerians have long been famed for their cities, the Akkadians are known for their tongue, their warrior culture, and their restless energy. Their language, Akkadian, will one day rival and even replace Sumerian as the lingua franca of the ancient Near East. Sumer and Akkad together form a fragile world of balance: southern farmers and northern fighters, city dwellers and semi-nomads, scribes and warriors. Yet from this balance will come the first empire in human history, forged by a man whose origins are as mysterious as they are humble. But before we arrive at his tale, you pause to see the stage more clearly. Imagine the daily rhythms of this land. Merchants shout prices in the market squares, trade in wool, silver grain, and lapis lazuli brought from distant mountains. Potters spin their wheels, shaping vessels that will carry oil and wine. Children play in the alleys with small clay toys, while elders sit and recite proverbs that have been passed down for generations. Above them all, the ziggurat looms a reminder that the gods are always watching. At night, the stars glitter over the flat plains. Priests read omens from the sky, seeking to understand the will of the divine. For in this land fate is everything, and the gods decide the rise and fall of kings. It is here in this cradle of civilization that Sargon will one day emerge, a man of no royal birth, yet destined to be remembered as the first great king, the first emperor, the conqueror of the four corners of the world. But his story begins not in palaces or ziggurats, not in the safety of the walls of Ur or Uruk. His story begins with a river, a mother who must hide her child, and a basket that floats downstream under the blazing Mesopotamian sun. This land of abundance and rivalry, of invention and war, has prepared the stage. The players are already set. The cities wait their walls standing tall, their kings watching the horizon nervously. For one day, soon a child will rise from the waters, a man who will break the old order and build something new. As you close your eyes, you feel the hum of history all around you, the rustle of barley fields, the crash of spears on bronze shields, the low chanting of priests as incense burns. This is Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, the cradle where kings are born and where empires will rise and fall. And out of this cradle Sargon will come, born of the river child of mystery. The story of Sargon does not begin in the safety of a palace or the halls of a temple. It begins instead with secrecy, fear, and the slow drift of a basket upon a river's current. The legend tells us that Sargon was the child of a priestess, a woman bound by sacred vows never to marry and never to bear children. Yet she did, and the baby she brought into the world was a child she could not keep. In the dark hours of the night, with trembling hands, she placed her newborn into a woven basket of reeds, sealed it with pitch, and set it gently upon the waters of the Euphrates. Imagine the scene, the mother's whisper, a final prayer to the gods, and then the baby, floating away, carried downstream under the rising sun, like the story of Moses that would echo centuries later. This tale of Sargon's birth was told and retold by the people of Mesopotamia, shaping him into a figure touched by destiny. The basket drifted to the hands of a humble gardener named Aki, who found the crying infant along the riverbank. Aki lifted the boy from the reeds, raised him in his household, and gave him a simple trade tending orchards and learning the ways of the earth. And so the boy, who would one day conquer kingdoms, first grew among rows of fruit trees, his hands roughened by soil, his body hardened by labor. But even in this humble childhood, the legends say the gods had marked him. His name, Sharukin in Akkadian, meant the true king or the legitimate ruler. It was not yet his title, but a whisper of fate. As you picture the young Sargon walking barefoot in the fields, you can almost feel the weight of destiny pressing down upon him. His eyes were fixed not on the orchards, but on the horizon. The world of city-states was in turmoil, Kish, Uruk, Lagash, and Ur, all vying for dominance. Armies clashed over borders, and kings rose and fell in violent succession. To many this was chaos, to Sargon it was opportunity. In time, Sargon left the orchards of Aki and entered the service of Ur-Zababa, king of Kish. He began in the lowly but trusted role of cupbearer, the one who poured wine for the king and stood always near his throne. To outsiders it may have seemed a small role, but in Mesopotamian courts the cupbearer was often close to power, privy to whispers, schemes and secrets. The boy from the river now stood in royal halls, listening, learning, watching. He absorbed the rituals of kingship, the speeches of generals, the prayers of priests. Every moment was a lesson, every gesture of the king a study in how to rule. But the gods are never silent, and Sargon's story turns on an omen. The tale goes that Ur-Zababa grew uneasy with his young servant. He dreamed dreams that troubled his sleep, visions of Sargon's greatness, perhaps, or of betrayal yet to come. The priests interpreted the omens the gods favored the cupbearer. Ur-Zababa's fear grew. In desperation, the king plotted against his servant. He sent Sargon on dangerous missions, perhaps hoping he would fall. Some stories even tell of schemes to deliver Sargon into the hands of enemies or into the clutches of the goddess Inanna herself. But the gods did not forsake him. Again and again Sargon returned alive, stronger and more confident. This tale, half history, half legend, tells us much about how the Mesopotamians saw their first emperor. He was not merely a man of skill and cunning, but a man shielded by divine favor. For in this world kings were never simply rulers of flesh and blood. They were chosen, elevated, and tested by the gods themselves. You close your eyes and imagine Sargon as a young man in Kish. His back is straight, his voice calm, his presence commanding, even though he wears no crown. Around him the court bustles with scribes, soldiers, merchants, and priests. Yet when Sargon walks into the room, eyes follow him. People feel it already, that aura of greatness, the sense that here stands someone different. And yet still he is only a servant. His time has not yet come, but like the waters of the river that once carried him, fate flows steadily forward. Soon, very soon, the cupbearer will rise to seize a throne, and the world will never be the same again. For now, though, you let the image settle, a baby adrift on the river, a gardener's kindness, a boy hardened in orchards, a youth rising in the courts of Kish, and a destiny that even the king himself could not deny. This is the beginning of Sargon the Great, the child of mystery, the river-born, the chosen one who will cupbearer to the king. You are standing in the grand city of Kish, one of the jewels of Mesopotamia. Its walls rise high, built from countless mud bricks shimmering in the hot sun. Inside the gates, the city is alive with the bustle of trade merchants, bartering scribes etching records into clay priests burning incense to honor the gods. At the center of it all in his palace sits Ur-Zababa, king of Kish. Here in this court Sargon of Akkad serves. He is not yet a king, not yet a conqueror. He is only the cupbearer. But in Mesopotamian courts, that title carries a weight far greater than the name suggests. As cupbearer, Sargon stands close to the throne each day. He pours the king's wine, tastes it first, to ensure it is pure, and places the golden cup in his master's hand. He listens as generals deliver reports from the battlefield, as governors complain of rebellious cities, as priests interpret omens from the stars. He watches as ambassadors from Ur-Uruk and Lagash kneel and deliver their tributes. No position in the court is closer to power, and no position allows one to study it more carefully. You can almost picture Sargon standing silently, hands steady, his eyes observing everything. He says little, but in his mind he learns. He learns how kings speak with authority how they bargain with allies, how they punish disloyalty. He learns the rhythms of power, when to command, when to wait, when to strike. But his story here is not just one of quiet study. It is also a story of danger. For King Ur-Zababa grows uneasy with his servant. He dreams dreams that disturb his sleep. Perhaps he sees a shadow rising against him. Perhaps he sees his cupbearer on the throne. In a world where dreams are seen as messages from the gods, such visions cannot be ignored, and so fear creeps into the heart of Ur-Zababa. The king begins to suspect the gods favor this young servant more than himself. He begins to fear the man who pours his wine. The legends say Ur-Zababa plotted against Sargon. In one story, he sends Sargon to deliver a sealed tablet to the rival king of Uruk-Lugal-Zagesi. Unknown to Sargon, the message instructs Lugal-Zagesi to kill the messenger, but the goddess Inanna, protectress of kings, intervenes. She warns Lugal-Zagesi in a dream not to harm the bearer of the message, for he is destined for greatness, and so Sargon survives. Another tale says that Ur-Zababa attempted to lure Sargon into a deadly trap inside the temple of Ishtar. Yet the goddess favored Sargon, shielding him from harm. Time after time the plots of the king failed. Whether legend or truth, the message is clear: Sargon could not be undone. He was protected by destiny, guarded by divine will. And so Sargon continued in his role, watching, listening, waiting. But something was shifting. Every courtier could feel it. The young man from humble beginnings carried himself with a quiet confidence. His presence was magnetic, his voice steady, his manner calm. To the soldiers in the palace guard, he seemed like one of them. To the scribes, he seemed as thoughtful as a scholar. To the priests, he seemed marked by the gods. The people began to whisper. Perhaps he was meant for more. You close your eyes and imagine the flickering torchlight of Kish's palace. The king sits uneasy on his throne. Sargon the cupbearer pours the wine as he always does, but in that simple act, in the stillness of his hands, in the calm in his eyes, lies a strength that the king cannot shake from his mind. Here stands the paradox, the servant who looks like a ruler, the man of no royal birth who carries the aura of kingship. Sargon himself must have felt it too. With each day he learned more about the fragile alliances of the city-states, the endless wars for supremacy, the dissatisfaction of soldiers, and the ambitions of merchants. He knew the world was unstable, ripe for someone bold enough to seize it. And though he poured the king's wine in his heart, he was preparing for something far greater. The time was coming when he would no longer serve another man's throne. He would take a throne for himself. He would no longer hold a cup, but a scepter. For now, though he waits, and as you drift deeper into this tale, you feel that tension, a servant standing silently at the side of the king, yet carrying within him the fire of an emperor. Soon the balance of power will break. Soon the world will know his name. But here, in the palace of Kish, in these quiet moments, the seed of empire is still being planted. The cupbearer watches. The cupbearer learns. The cupbearer waits. The plot against Ur-Zababa. The tension in Kish has grown heavy, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. Ur-Zababa, king of Kish, cannot sleep. His dreams are dark, filled with omens of betrayal, shadows rising, thrones overturned. And always at the center of these visions stands his servant, his own cupbearer, Sargon. For in the world of Mesopotamia, dreams are not idle fantasies. They are messages from the god signs of destiny, that cannot be ignored, and Ur-Zababa is afraid. Each day Sargon carries out his duties with quiet precision, pouring the king's wine, serving in silence. Yet the king sees something more in him now, a presence, a strength, a dangerous possibility. How could a man of such low birth inspire such fear in a king? And yet he does. Ur-Zababa decides that Sargon must be removed, but how to kill a servant so openly would invite scandal and unrest. The soldiers already respect the young cupbearer. The people admire his calmness, his diligence. To strike him down directly could backfire, and so the king turns to cunning. The legends tell us that Ur-Zababa devised a secret plan. He summoned Sargon and handed him a sealed clay tablet. The message, he said, was to be delivered to the ruler of Uruk, his rival Lugal-Zaggisi. Sargon, obedient as always, took the tablet and prepared for the journey. But what he did not know was this: the tablet contained an order for his death. It commanded Lugal-Zaggisi to slay the messenger immediately. Imagine Sargon walking along the dusty road to Uruk, carrying the tablet in a satchel at his side, unaware of the fate written inside. The sun blazes overhead, the fields stretch wide and silent. Each step brings him closer to danger. But here the story turns on the hand of the divine. The goddess Inanna, known to the Akkadians as Ishtar, was said to have favored Sargon. She was goddess of love and war, patroness of kings, fierce and unpredictable. And in this tale it is she who intervenes. That night, as Lugal-Zaggisi slept, Inanna appeared to him in a dream. She warned him not to harm the bearer of the message, for the gods had chosen him for greatness. And so when Sargon arrived at the gates of Uruk and delivered the tablet, Lugal-Zaggisi did not act. The king of Uruk read the words, understood the plot, and chose not to kill the man standing before him. Instead, he spared him, and in doing so the destiny of Mesopotamia shifted forever. Another story tells of Ur-Zababa sending Sargon into the temple of Ishtar, hoping the goddess herself would destroy him. But instead of striking him down, Inanna embraced him as her own, declaring him favored. Whichever tale you follow, the meaning is the same: the gods shielded Sargon. And so time after time, the king's schemes failed. You can feel the suspense in the palace halls of Kish. Ur-Zababa grows more frantic, more fearful. The court buzzes with whispers. Some believe the king has lost the gods' favor. Others see in Sargon the glow of destiny, the aura of a man chosen for greatness. Sargon himself must have begun to feel it too. Perhaps he did not yet plan rebellion, but deep within he knew something was stirring. The world of the city-states was fragile, teetering on the edge of change. And he, the orphan, the gardener's foundling, the cupbearer, was being prepared for something larger than life. It is at this point that history grows tangled with legend. We do not know the exact moment when Sargon broke free from Ur-Zababa's grasp. Some accounts suggest he turned against his master in open revolt, gathering soldiers to his side. Others say he fled Kish, biding his time until the gods gave him the chance to strike. What is clear is this: the balance of power was about to collapse. In the courts of Mesopotamia, plots and betrayals were common. Kings toppled each other as often as the floods of the rivers rose and fell. But there was something different about Sargon. He was not merely a rival king, another city-state warlord fighting for dominance. He was something new. He would not just replace Ur-Zababa, he would change the entire system itself. Picture the moment: Ur-Zababa pacing in his chambers, haunted by dreams, surrounded by trembling advisors. Sargon standing silently in the shadows, watching, waiting. The two men bound together by fate, one desperately clinging to power, the other quietly preparing to seize it. The storm is building. Soon the plot will unravel. Soon the servant will overthrow the king. Soon the orphan of the river will rise higher than any man before him. And so you drift deeper into the story, knowing what must come next. The betrayal has failed. The gods have chosen. The throne of Kish trembles beneath its fearful king. The cupbearer is no longer just a servant. He is a challenger, a threat, a destiny in human form. The first strike for power. The time of waiting has passed. The plots of Ur-Zababa have failed. The dreams of kings have foretold too much, and the whispers of destiny have grown too loud to ignore. Now Sargon, once only a cupbearer, begins to step out from the shadows of Kish and take hold of his fate. You can almost feel the moment crackling with energy. The city-states of Mesopotamia are restless as they have always been. Armies clash over canals, and farmland kings rise and fall in rapid succession. To many this chaos is exhausting, but to Sargon it is opportunity. The sources are unclear, shrouded in half-legend, but one thing is certain: Sargon rose in rebellion, no longer content to serve, no longer willing to be the pawn of a fearful king. He gathered supporters to his side. Perhaps it began with soldiers in the court, men who had watched him with respect and admiration. Perhaps it began with priests who whispered that the goddess Inanna favored him. Perhaps it began with merchants who believed a strong ruler could stabilize trade. Whoever first followed him, their number grew. In time, Sargon turned against his master. Ur-Zababa, once king of Kish, fell, and in his place Sargon took the throne. It is a stunning transformation. The servant is now the sovereign. The cupbearer now wears the crown. The orphan of the river now commands the city of Kish. But Sargon does not stop there. His ambition is greater than one city, greater even than one kingdom. He does not wish to rule only Kish, he wishes to rule all of Mesopotamia, and so begins his first true campaign of conquest. His enemy is none other than Lugal-Zaggisi, king of Uruk. At this time, Lugal-Zaggisi is a powerful ruler, perhaps the most powerful in Sumer. He has already subdued many city-states, binding them under his authority. His armies are strong, his reputation feared. He is said to have marched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, boasting of dominion over wide lands. But now he meets Sargon. The battle between Kish and Uruk is not preserved in exact detail, but the outcome is clear. Sargon defeats Lugal-Zaggisi. Some traditions say he captured him alive, binding him in chains and parading him through the gates of Nippur, the sacred city of the god Enlil. Imagine that sight, the proud king of Uruk humiliated before the gods, and people forced to bow before the man he once might have dismissed as a servant. It is a turning point. With Lugal-Zaggisi defeated, Sargon does not merely claim victory, he claims legitimacy. To display a rival in chains at Nippur, to offer him up before Enlil, is to declare that the gods themselves have chosen Sargon as ruler. And from this moment forward, city after city begins to fall under his control. Ur-Lagash-Umma and others, each is drawn into Sargon's expanding domain. Some yield by force, their walls broken by Akkadian soldiers. Others yield by necessity, bowing to the new power who has risen with such speed. The dream of uniting Sumer under one ruler, something attempted by many, achieved by none, is beginning to come true. You can almost hear the clash of bronze against bronze, the cries of soldiers in the fields, the chants of priests offering sacrifices before battle. Yet amid this storm of war there is something calm and steady at the center, Sargon himself. History remembers him not only as a warrior, but as a man of extraordinary presence, one who could inspire loyalty, instill fear, and carry the weight of kingship with unshakable confidence. For the first time in history, a man is attempting more than dominance over one city. He is building something larger, something that will last beyond the life of one king. He is building an empire. And it all begins here with the first strike for power, the rebellion against Ur-Zababa, the victory over Lugal-Zagizi, the humiliation of a rival paraded in chains, and the swift expansion of territory under his command. This is not just another shift in Mesopotamian politics. This is something new. The old world of endlessly feuding city-states is beginning to give way. A new order is rising, forged by the hands of a man once set adrift in a river. As you let your mind drift, you can picture Sargon standing upon the walls of Kish, gazing out at the plains. His city is no longer merely Kish. It is the beginning of something vast. His eyes do not rest only on the horizon of Sumer, but on the mountains, the rivers, the seas beyond. For already he carries within him the dream of ruling not just a city, not just a land, but the four corners of the world. The servant has become a king, and the king has become a conqueror. Wars across Sumer. The throne of Kish is his, but Sargon does not rest. He has toppled Ur-Zababa, humbled Lugal-Zagizi, and placed himself on the stage of kings. Yet in the land between rivers, no throne is secure for long. The cities of Sumer watch him with suspicion, their walls high, their armies ready, their kings proud. Uruk, Lagash, Umanipur, each a city with its own ruler, its own temple, its own claim to greatness. For centuries they have warred against each other in endless rivalries. Each has dreamed of uniting the land under one crown, but none have succeeded. And now a new figure rises, not of Sumerian blood, but Akkadian. To some he is an intruder, to others a conqueror sent by the gods. Sargon prepares for war. His soldiers gather outside Kish, bronze helmets gleaming in the sun, shields of leather and wood, strapped to their arms, spears and axes in hand. This is not a levy of farmers called for a season. Already Sargon is shaping something new, a standing army loyal not to their own cities, but to their king. This force will march with him year after year, campaign after campaign, and it will become the hammer that breaks Sumer. The first target is Uruk, still loyal to the fallen Lugal-Zagizi. The walls of Uruk are mighty, its ziggurat towering above the plains. But Sargon's forces storm the city and Uruk falls. The humiliation of its captured king is complete. From Uruk, Sargon moves swiftly southward to Ur. The sacred city of the moon, god Nana, resists, but its walls too cannot withstand his army. Soon the crescent standard of Ur is lowered, and the banner of Akkad is raised. From Ur the campaign turns to Lagash. Once a powerful city-state under its famed ruler, Eannatum Lagash, has seen its share of victories and defeats. Now it faces the relentless march of Akkad. Again Sargon triumphs. Battle after battle, city after city, the pattern repeats. Some resist and are crushed. Others see the writing on the wall and surrender, swearing allegiance to Sargon. By the time his wars across Sumer end, the unthinkable has happened. The cities of Sumer, once fiercely independent, are united under one ruler. The chronicles tell us that Sargon claimed to have defeated 34 kings in battle. Imagine that number. 34 crowns toppled 34 city lords, cast down 34 walls, breached or surrendered. Never before has one man subdued so many rulers, but Sargon does not stop with military victory. He understands that to rule Sumer he must rule not only with the sword, but with the symbols of divine authority. And so he turns to Nippur, the sacred city of Enlil, father of the gods. To be recognized as king in Mesopotamia, one must have the blessing of Nippur. And Sargon secures it by offering tribute and sacrifice. By presenting himself as chosen of the gods, he binds religion to his crown. In this he is more than a conqueror. He is a ruler who grasps the deep truth of Mesopotamia. Power must rest not only on soldiers, but on the will of the divine. Picture the sight: Sargon standing in the temple of Enlil priests, chanting incense, rising the city's sacred statue, glimmering in lamplight. Here before the god of the air, Sargon is no longer simply the victorious warrior. He is the legitimate ruler of all Sumer. The wars across Sumer transform more than just politics. They change the daily lives of the people. Merchants who once traveled nervously between rival cities now move more freely under one authority. Farmers who once feared raids from neighbors now labor under a broader, if stricter, system of tribute. Scribes record decrees not just for Ur or Lagash, but for all of Sumer in both Sumerian and Akkadian tongues. And yet, peace is fragile. Beneath the surface, resentment simmers. The old kings still dream of independence. The priests of certain cities grumble that the gods favor their own temples more than Sargon's chosen shrines. Rebellions will flare again and again, but each time Sargon returns, leading his army to restore order. You close your eyes and hear the clash of bronze weapons, the shouts of soldiers, the thud of battering rams against wooden gates. You hear the laments of defeated kings, the cries of their people, and the chanting of Akkadian soldiers proclaiming victory. This is the sound of empire being born. For the first time in history, the fractious cities of Sumer are bound together, not as equals, not as allies, but under the firm hand of one ruler, Sargon of Akkad. And as you drift in this moment, you realize how extraordinary it is. For thousands of years, humanity has lived in tribes, villages, and city-states. Now, for the first time, the idea of empire emerges. A land of many peoples, many gods, many tongues, ruled by a single man, his word stretching across rivers and deserts. It began with rebellion in Kish. It continues now with the wars across Sumer, and soon it will expand even further beyond the land of the two rivers into mountains and seas, into territories no Mesopotamian ruler has ever dared to claim. The world is changing, and Sargon is leading it. The founding of Akkad, the wars across Sumer, have ended in victory. 34 kings have fallen. Uruk, Lagash, and countless other cities now bow to a single ruler. Sargon, once the servant, once the orphan, has become master of the land between rivers. But conquest alone cannot hold an empire. The cities of Sumer are ancient and proud, their temples filled with gods older than memory. If Sargon rules from any one of them, resentment may fester. Ur will say the king favors Ur. Lagash will whisper that its gods are neglected. Uruk will claim its traditions are being ignored. No, Sargon needs something new. And so he founds a city. Its name is Akkad, or Agade, as the Sumerians called it. A place built not merely to be another city-state, but to stand as the beating heart of an empire. Its exact location is lost to us now, swallowed by time and shifting rivers. Scholars search the plains of Mesopotamia, hunting for ruins, but no one has yet found it. And so Akkad, though once the center of the world, lingers as a mystery. You close your eyes and imagine it. The walls of Akkad rising tall and gleaming in the sun, made from countless bricks of clay. Wide streets lined with markets where merchants from across the empire bring goods, wool from the south, metals from the mountains, lapis lazuli from far Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon. The smell of spices drifts through the air. The cries of traders echo across the plazas. At the center stands a great palace where Sargon rules. Here courtiers, generals, priests and scribes gather. Clay tablets stack high recording decrees, tributes and treaties. This is not just a king's residence, it is the hub of a vast administrative machine, a new model of rulership. And beyond the palace rises the temple of Ishtar, the goddess who had shielded Sargon in his youth, who had preserved him when Ur-Zababa plotted his death. Now she is enshrined as patroness of Akkad, the goddess of war and love, whose favor legitimizes his rule. Priests chant her hymns, women dance in her honor, and soldiers dedicate their victories to her name. Akkad is not just a capital, it is a statement. It declares this is something new. No longer do city-states rule each other in endless succession. No longer do rival kings fight for supremacy. Here stands an empire with a city built to embody it. You can almost hear the buzz of life in Akkad, scribes hunched over tablets recording laws and victories, soldiers marching through its gates, their armor glinting, their boots thudding on stone, merchants leading donkeys laden with goods from distant lands, children chasing each other through narrow alleys laughing, and in the throne room Sargon himself seated with calm authority, his eyes fixed far beyond the horizon. It is in Akkad that Sargon consolidates his power. He appoints governors, not local kings, but officials loyal directly to him to oversee conquered cities. He creates new systems of taxation, ensuring wealth flows into the heart of the empire. He commands that the Akkadian language be used for administration, slowly weaving together a patchwork of peoples under one tongue. The founding of Akkad is more than practical, it is symbolic. It is the moment Sargon says to the world, I am not merely a king of Kish or a conqueror of Uruk. I am the ruler of something larger, something unprecedented. I am king of an empire. Legends later told that Sargon ruled from Akkad for 55 years. They said he commanded territories stretching from the Persian Gulf in the south to the mountains of Anatolia in the north, from Elam in the east to the Great Sea in the west. And while some of these claims may be embellished, the truth remains that Akkad was the first capital of the first empire in recorded history. As you imagine it now, you see more than mud bricks and bustling markets. You see the dream of empire itself taking physical form. The first attempt by humanity to build something that would last beyond one city, one dynasty, one king. Akkad is the birthplace of that vision. And yet there is a haunting mystery. Where is Akkad now? No ruins have been found. No city walls uncovered. Only echoes remain in inscriptions carved on clay. Some scholars wonder if the city was swallowed by the rivers or destroyed so thoroughly that not even its foundations survived. Others suggest it still lies buried, waiting beneath the sands. But for Sargon's time it stood tall and proud, a beacon, a throne, a promise. The city where the orphan of the river ruled as the first emperor of the world. And as the sun sets over Akkad, its towers glowing in the fading light, you feel the magnitude of the moment. Humanity has stepped into a new age, the age of empires. March to the sea. The city of Akkad stands firm, the throne secure the gods, seemingly in Sargon's favor. Yet the king is not content to hold only the land between the rivers. His ambition stretches farther to lands beyond Sumer and Akkad, to mountains and seas that few Mesopotamian rulers have ever seen. For centuries, the city-states of Sumer had fought each other, their struggles confined to the fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia. Rarely did their wars extend beyond the immediate neighbors. But Sargon sees further. He dreams not only of ruling the rivers, but of reaching the ends of the known world, and so begins his march to the sea. From Akkad, his armies move westward. The flat plains of Mesopotamia give way to rolling hills and rugged paths. Caravans carry supplies while soldiers march in disciplined ranks, unlike the levies of old. For Sargon has forged something new, a permanent army trained and ready for campaigns that last years, not seasons. This alone sets him apart from every king who came before him. The campaign stretches across northern Mesopotamia into the lands of Mari and Ebla cities that lie along the trade routes leading to Syria. These cities have long prospered as crossroads of commerce where merchants exchange Mesopotamian grain and textiles for cedar wood from Lebanon, copper from Anatolia, and tin from the east. To control these routes is to control the arteries of wealth. One by one they fall to Sargon's might. His armies continue west, pressing farther than most Mesopotamian kings had dared. The Euphrates winds through foreign lands, and Akkadian banners flutter over places once thought distant. And then at last his soldiers reach the edge of the world as they know it, the Mediterranean Sea. Imagine the sight through Akkadian eyes. Men who grew up among the rivers of the south now stand on sandy shores, watching waves crash endlessly against the coast. The salty air stings their nostrils. The vast horizon of water stretches beyond imagination. They call it the Upper Sea, a boundary of the earth itself. Here, Sargon makes his mark. After inscriptions boast that he washed his weapons in the sea, a symbolic act to show that his power reached as far as the waters of the west. Whether this moment happened exactly as told, or whether it was a legend woven by scribes, it carries the weight of truth. Sargon had extended his reach farther than any king before him. The march to the sea is not only about conquest, it is about control of trade. The cedar forests of Lebanon provide timber essential for building. Silver flows from Anatolia, copper from Cyprus, precious stones from far-off lands. By pushing westward, Sargon secures these lifelines of wealth, ensuring that Akkad will not only rule by the sword, but by commerce. Picture the scene in Akkad's markets after these conquests, merchants shouting the prices at cedar planks, their scent rich and sharp. Artisans polishing silver into jewelry, priests displaying sacred objects adorned with lapis lazuli and carnelian from distant mountains. The empire is no longer confined to the soil of Mesopotamia. Its fingers stretch across deserts, mountains, and seas. This expansion also reshapes how the world sees kingship. Earlier rulers called themselves kings of specific cities: King of Ur, King of Lagash, King of Kish. Sargon begins to take on a new title, King of the Four Corners of the World. It is not merely a boast, it is a declaration that his rule has no boundaries. From the Persian Gulf in the south to the Mediterranean in the west, From the mountains of Anatolia in the north to the lands of Elam in the east, his empire spans horizons. And yet even as his armies march farther, the challenges grow. Each conquest brings new peoples into the fold, different languages, different gods, different traditions. The Akkadian Empire is not a simple kingdom, but a mosaic of cultures bound by Sargon's authority. It is a fragile balance, one that will require constant vigilance. Still, the march to the sea becomes a defining moment. It is proof that Sargon is not only a conqueror of cities, but a visionary who thinks in terms of regions, of continents, of the world itself. He is no longer just a king among kings. He is something new, the first emperor. You close your eyes and imagine the waves crashing on the shore, Akkadian soldiers dipping their weapons into the salty water, their voices raised in victory chants. Somewhere in the crowd, Sargon himself stands tall, gazing at the endless horizon. Perhaps he smiles, knowing that he has achieved what no one before him has done. Perhaps he is already planning the next march, the next conquest, the next step toward ruling all that the sun touches. The Mediterranean glimmers before him, vast and eternal. The empire he is building stretches behind him, strong and growing. The world is changing, and Sargon of Akkad is the man who is reshaping it, conqueror of the four corners. The Mediterranean waves still echo in the memory of his soldiers. They had marched farther than any Mesopotamian army before them, and Sargon's power now stretches across horizons once thought unreachable. From the coasts of the west to the mountains of the east, from the northern hills to the fertile southern marshes, his reach is vast. And now Sargon takes upon himself a title that will define not only his reign, but the very idea of empire for centuries to come. He calls himself King of the Four Quarters of the world. The four quarters, north, south, east, and west, symbolize the totality of the earth. No longer is he King of Kish, a title tied to one city. No longer does he claim only King of Sumer and Akkad, a title of two peoples. He now places himself above all as ruler of the known world itself. It is a bold declaration. In a time when kingship was usually local, Sargon claims universality. It is not just a political move, it is a statement of divine destiny. For only with the god's blessing could such a claim be made. In the temples of Akkad, the priests proclaim his greatness. Hymns are composed in his honor. One fragment, known later as the Sargon legend, describes how he ruled the world with the favor of the goddess Ishtar. In these verses, Sargon is portrayed as invincible, chosen, destined. He is no longer simply a man, but a figure of myth. You imagine him standing in his capital Akkad, surrounded by advisors and generals. Clay tablets recording victories pile high before scribes. Messengers arrive daily from conquered lands, bringing tribute gold and silver lapis and cedar grain and oil. Governors appointed by Sargon himself rule cities in his name. Armies patrol the empire's frontiers. For the first time in human history, the machinery of empire hums into motion. But behind the grandeur lies a reality of constant struggle. To call oneself king of the four quarters is to invite rebellion at every corner. The old kings of Sumer still yearn for independence. The highland tribes in the Zagros Mountains resist Akkadian governors. In the north, restless cities test the strength of his garrisons. Again and again, Sargon must march out with his armies to restore order. Yet this, too, becomes part of his legend. The chronicles say that in his old age, when rebellion rose against him from east to west, He fought 34 battles in 1 year and triumphed in them all. Whether exaggerated or not, the image is clear. Sargon, even as an old man, is still on the battlefield, still leading his soldiers, still conquering. His title is more than words. It is a vision, a new way of thinking about rulership. For centuries after his death, Mesopotamian kings will echo his claim, styling themselves king of the four corners. Even empires far removed from Akkad, like Assyria and Babylon, will trace their authority back to Sargon's model. You can see why. For the people of his time, Sargon must have seemed larger than life. His story, born in secret, set adrift on a river, raised by a gardener rising from cupbearer to king, already carried the air of destiny. Now, as conqueror of the four corners, he appears as the very embodiment of divine will. The gods had raised him up from nothing and given him everything. Imagine the ceremonies in Akkad, processions of soldiers bearing captured banners, governors kneeling before the throne to present their reports, priests carrying statues of the gods acknowledging Sargon as their chosen ruler. Crowds lining the streets cheering as tributes from distant lands are paraded through the city. Akkad itself must have pulsed with energy, alive with the sense that they were living at the center of the world. And at the heart of it all is Sargon, calm, confident, unyielding. A man who believed, or at least proclaimed, that no part of the known world lay beyond his grasp. But even as he stands at the height of power, shadows linger. To rule an empire so vast requires constant force. Rebellions flare, and while Sargon quells them, they reveal how fragile empire can be. Unlike a single city, an empire stretches across lands with different languages, traditions, and loyalties. Each victory must be maintained. Each conquest must be defended. Still, Sargon endures. His legend only grows. Later stories tell of him bathing in the seas, his armies marching to lands no Sumerian had seen, his banners planted in distant soils. Perhaps some of these tales are embellishments woven by scribes to glorify their king. But the essence is true. Sargon was the first to dream of empire and the first to make that dream real. As you let the story settle, you can feel the weight of that title, King of the Four Quarters of the World. It is more than ambition. It is the beginning of an idea that will echo through history. From Hammurabi to Cyrus the Great, from Alexander to Caesar, rulers will follow in Sargon's footsteps, each seeking to claim the world as their own. And it began here in the dust of Mesopotamia with an orphan set adrift in a river who rose to conquer everything around him, the standing army. The victories of Sargon are not won by chance alone, nor by the favor of the gods, nor even by his own brilliance. Behind his triumphs stands something revolutionary, something the world had never truly seen before: a permanent professional army. Before Sargon, the wars of Sumer were fought by levies. When danger threatened, kings summoned farmers from their fields, handed them spears and shields, and marched them to battle. When the campaign was over, the men returned to their farms, leaving the city undefended until the next summons. It was a system that worked for city-states fighting seasonal wars, but it could not sustain empire. Sargon understood this. To rule not just Kish, not just Ur or Uruk, but lands stretching from the Gulf to the sea, he needed soldiers who would fight year-round, who would not scatter when the harvest came, and so he forged the first true standing army in history. You can imagine the sight. Rows of soldiers drilling in the courtyards of Akkad, their shields locked together, their spears held steady. They wear bronze helmets and carry weapons of wood and metal axes, bows and daggers. They march in rhythm, their boots thudding against the packed earth, their voices raised in chants. These are not farmers in borrowed armor. These are warriors trained, disciplined, and loyal to their king. The chronicles speak of 400 men who ate at Sargon's table each day. Whether this number is literal or symbolic, it conveys the truth. Sargon maintained a permanent force, housed, fed, and equipped by the crown. Each man depended on him for livelihood, and in return, each man gave him loyalty. With such an army, Sargon could campaign continuously. No longer bound by the seasons, he marched when he wished, striking swiftly at rebellions, pressing deep into foreign lands. His enemies, still relying on temporary levies, could not match the endurance of Akkad's professional soldiers. The presence of this army transformed the empire. Garrisons were stationed in conquered cities to ensure loyalty. Patrols secured trade routes, protecting caravans and merchants. Governors appointed by Sargon could call upon soldiers to enforce decrees. The army was not just a tool of conquest, it was the glue that held the empire together, but it was also something more, a symbol of power. When Sargon rode at the head of his army, he embodied more than a king. He was the living force of Akkad. To his subjects, the sight of thousands of armored men loyal only to him was awe-inspiring, even terrifying. To his enemies, it was a warning: resist and you will be crushed by the might of Akkad. And so Sargon's name carried weight not only in the temples of Sumer, but in the mountains of Elam, in the deserts of Syria, along the coasts of the Mediterranean. His army gave substance to his claim of ruling the 4 quarters of the world. Without it, his empire would have been no more secure than the shifting sands. With it, he built a foundation that would endure for decades. As you drift deeper into this story, picture the daily life of these soldiers. At dawn, they rise from their tents, sharpen their bronze weapons, and drill in formation. They march in the heat of the day, carrying rations of grain, and water their sandals worn from endless miles. They set up camp in neat rows, cooking meals over small fires, their laughter and songs echoing across the plains. For many, this is not a seasonal duty, but a life's calling. Their loyalty is not to a city or a local king, but to Sargon himself, the man who feeds them, leads them, and shares their hardships on campaign. And Sargon does share them. The chronicles describe him as a king who fought alongside his men, who endured the dust and heat of the march, who did not rule from a palace alone, but from the field of battle. This too secured their devotion. He was not distant, he was one of them, and yet greater than them all. The standing army is perhaps Sargon's greatest gift to history. Long after his empire falls, the idea remains. Babylon will build its forces in the same way. Assyria will take it even further, forging armies that terrorize the ancient Near East. Even in lands far from Mesopotamia, the model will echo: a permanent military loyal not to the harvest but to the crown. It is strange to think that such a simple idea, to keep an army ready at all times, could change the world so profoundly. But it does. And it begins here with Sargon of Akkad, the orphan-turned emperor, who understood that to rule the 4 corners of the world, one must always have soldiers at hand. As you let your mind wander, you hear the rhythm of marching feet, the ring of bronze weapons clashing in drills, the low chant of soldiers swearing oaths of loyalty. You see them gathered around campfires, eating from the king's table, speaking of battles past and victories yet to come. And at the center of it all stands Sargon, commander Conqueror, and the first great general of empire of governors. Conquest brings glory, but conquest alone cannot hold an empire. Sargon of Akkad, standing at the height of his power, knows this truth well. His soldiers can storm the walls of Uruk and Lagash, but once the fighting ends, the question lingers. How do you govern lands filled with ancient traditions, proud priests and citizens who remember their independence? The answer lies not only in armies, but in administration. And here too, Sargon is a pioneer. Instead of leaving defeated kings in place men who might plot rebellion at the first opportunity, Sargon appoints governors loyal directly to him. These officials, known in Akkadian as Ensi or Shakanaku, oversee cities and regions in his name. They collect tribute, maintain order, and enforce Akkadian law. Their loyalty is not to their local city or god, but to Sargon himself. You can imagine them riding out from Akkad, carrying clay tablets sealed with the king's mark, arriving in cities once ruled by local dynasties. The people gather nervously in the streets as these governors step into the palace, take their seats on thrones, once occupied by proud kings, and announce that from this day forward Akkad rules here. It is a daring move. The Sumerian cities are ancient, their traditions deep-rooted. To place outsiders in charge is to invite resentment. And yet Sargon balances his authority with careful strategy. He does not erase local culture. The temples still stand. The gods are still worshipped. Priests still perform their rituals. But above them all is the authority of Akkad, embodied in the governor. Tribute flows steadily into the empire's heart. Grain, silver, wool, and other goods are collected from each city and sent to Akkad. With these resources, Sargon can feed his standing army, build his capital, and fund further campaigns. For the first time, wealth from across a vast region is centralized under one crown. The governors also play a crucial role in communication. Messengers travel constantly between Akkad and the cities, carrying tablets inscribed with royal decrees. In this way, Sargon's voice can reach places hundreds of miles away, commanding obedience without his physical presence. It is as if the king himself extends his hand across the land. But ruling through governors is not without its challenges. These men are powerful, and their power depends entirely on the king's strength. As long as Sargon lives and commands loyalty, they obey. But the system will prove fragile after his death when successors struggle to maintain the same authority. For now, though, the empire is held firm by the will of its creator. You close your eyes and picture a scene in the city of Ur. A governor sits in judgment. Citizens approach with disputes. A farmer claiming his neighbor diverted a canal, a merchant accusing another of cheating in trade. The governor listens, records the case on a clay tablet, and delivers a verdict in the king's name. Justice, once local, now flows from the empire's center. In another city, a governor oversees a garrison of Akkadian soldiers. They patrol the streets, ensuring order. At the temple, priests lead sacrifices, offering prayers for Sargon and Ishtar, goddess of war, and love, whose favor has secured Akkad's victories. Life continues much as it did before, but always under the shadow of imperial power. This system of governors marks a turning point in human history. For the first time, an empire is not simply a loose alliance of cities under a strong king. It is a centralized state with authority radiating outward from a capital. Akkad becomes more than just a city. It becomes the beating heart of an organized, bureaucratic machine. And Sargon is at the center of it, all orchestrating the delicate balance of conquest, loyalty, and governance. He is not only a warrior, but an administrator, a ruler, who understands that must be managed as carefully as it is won. Of course, resentment simmers. In some cities, rebellions flare, spurred on by local pride or the whisper of priests who resent foreign control. But each time Sargon responds swiftly. His army marches, his governors are reinforced, and the rebellion is crushed. The message is clear: Akkad rules and resistance is futile. The empire of governors becomes a model for the ages. Later dynasties in Mesopotamia, Babylon, Assyria will adopt and refine it. Even in distant lands, centuries later, rulers will follow the same principle. To rule a vast territory, you must appoint loyal officials who answer only to the crown. It is a simple idea, but revolutionary in its scope. As you drift with the story, you can feel the new rhythm of empire settling over Mesopotamia. Soldiers march under Akkadian banners, governors enforce Akkadian law, scribes record Akkadian decrees, priests chant Akkadian hymns. The land between rivers, once fractured and divided, now pulses with a single heartbeat. And yet you know it is fragile, for now Sargon holds it together with strength, wisdom, and divine favor. But empires are living things. They require constant care, and even the strongest can weaken when the hand that built them is gone. For now, though, Sargon's empire of governors stands as a wonder of the world, the first true empire stretching across rivers, mountains, and seas, held together not just by swords, but by administration. The servant has become a king, the king has become an emperor, and the emperor has become the architect of a system that will shape history forever. Language of power. Empires are not held together by soldiers alone. Sargon knows this. Armies can conquer cities, governors can enforce laws, but something more subtle is needed to bind together a land of many peoples. That something is language. Before Sargon, the great tongue of Mesopotamia was Sumerian. The Sumerians, the first to build cities, had also been the first to develop writing. Their cuneiform tablets carried hymns, laws, trade records, and myths. For centuries, their language had been the medium of culture and administration. Even the Akkadians living in the northern plains learned to read and write in Sumerian, just as scholars today learn Latin. But Sargon changes this. With the rise of his empire, he begins to elevate his own native tongue, Akkadian, as the language of power. Imagine the shift. In the schools where young scribes are trained, the wedge-shaped signs of cuneiform are still pressed into clay. But now the words are Akkadian, not Sumerian. Laws, contracts, and decrees are issued in the language of the conquerors. In city after city, officials and scribes adopt Akkadian to communicate with the empire's center. Slowly across the land between the rivers, one tongue begins to dominate. This is more than convenience. It is a deliberate act of unification. Sumer and Akkad, once rivals, are now merged in language. Sargon, who claims to be king of Sumer and Akkad, ensures that his empire speaks with one voice. Yet the story is not one of erasure. Sumerian does not vanish. It remains the language of priests and temples, of ancient hymns and sacred traditions. For centuries after, scribes will still study it as a scholarly tongue, much as Latin lingered long after Rome. But in daily life, in the business of empire, Akkadian becomes dominant. You close your eyes and picture a scribe at work. He sits cross-legged on the floor of a dimly lit room, a lump of clay before him, a reed stylus in hand. With practiced motions he presses symbols into the clay lists of taxes, shipments of grain, judgments of governors. Each word is Akkadian, carrying the authority of the empire. When the tablet is finished, it is dried and stored in the archives, one of thousands, all whispering in the new imperial tongue. Language is power. To write in Akkadian is to acknowledge Sargon's rule. To speak it in the marketplace is to join the empire's rhythm. Even foreign rulers, when they send messages to Akkad, must use this language. Step by step, word by word, Sargon's influence spreads deeper than armies can march. The shift also transforms culture. The old Sumerian myths are retold in Akkadian, reshaped for a new audience. Hymns to Ishtar, prayers to Enlil, epic tales of heroes, all are preserved in the new language. Out of this fusion will one day emerge works like the Epic of Gilgamesh, passed down through Akkadian tablets, ensuring the old stories survive even as the empire evolves. Think of what this means. Sargon does not just conquer land, he conquers memory, culture, thought. The empire does not only expand on maps, it expands in the very words people use to think and speak. In this, his power becomes more enduring than bronze weapons or city walls. But language also carries danger. To impose one tongue upon many peoples is to remind them daily of conquest. For the Sumerians, proud of their traditions, the rise of Akkadian must have been both practical and bitter. Priests in Ur and Lagash may have muttered that the gods still preferred Sumerian hymns. Elders may have grumbled that their children spoke Akkadian more easily than their own ancestral tongue. Beneath the surface, resentment lingered. And yet, over time, Akkadian prevailed. Its reach stretched beyond Sumer into Elamari and Ebla, carried by merchants and scribes. Even when the Akkadian Empire itself fell, the language endured for centuries, becoming the diplomatic tongue of the Near East, used from Egypt to Anatolia. In this way, Sargon's choice outlasted his dynasty. As you drift with the story, you hear the quiet scratching of styluses against clay, the murmurs of students in scribal schools, the chants of priests blending Sumerian and Akkadian prayers. You sense the merging of two worlds, the ancient cities of Sumer and the rising power of Akkad into something new, a cultural synthesis that will shape history. It is easy to see why later rulers revered Sargon. He was not only a conqueror, but a visionary who understood that empire must live in the daily lives of its people. And language, the words they spoke, the signs they pressed into clay, was the thread that wove them together. In the end, the language of power was as mighty as the army of Akkad, as enduring as its governors, as significant as its capital city. The cuneiform tablets written in Akkadian preserved his name and deeds for thousands of years. Even today, across the ruins of Mesopotamia, fragments of clay whisper his legacy in the language he made supreme. And so as you listen, you realize Sargon's empire was not just built on swords and stone, but on words. Clash with Elam. The West has felt his tread. The Mediterranean waves have carried the sound of Akkadian triumph. But Sargon is not a king who rests on a single horizon. His gaze turns now eastward toward the rugged mountains and valleys of Elam. Elam lies beyond the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, across the lower Tigris, and into the highlands of what is now southwestern Iran. Its cities, like Susa, are ancient and proud, as old as the Sumerian settlements to the west. Its people are not like the lowland farmers of Sumer or the merchants of Akkad. They are mountain folk, fierce and independent, living among rugged hills and valleys, their culture distinct, their gods their own. For centuries, Elam and Sumer have been rivals. Armies have crossed back and forth across the borders, raiding villages, clashing over trade routes. But now, for the first time, an empire, not a city-state, prepares to march against them. You can picture the march. Akkadian soldiers moving east, leaving behind the broad plains of Mesopotamia, following the winding rivers into more rugged country. The air grows cooler, the ground harder, the terrain broken by ridges and rocky passes. The soldiers carry with them the banners of Akkad, their weapons gleaming in the sun, their chants echoing against the hills. At their head is Sargon, no longer only the conqueror of Sumer, but the master of a growing empire. His ambition is clear. If he can subdue Elam, his rule will stretch from the Mediterranean in the west to the mountains of Iran in the east, a dominion wider than any before. The chronicles are fragmentary, but they tell us this. Sargon fought Elam and won. The city of Susa was brought under his control, its rulers humbled, its tribute flowing into Akkad. Imagine the shock of the Elamites, long accustomed to being a thorn in Sumer's side, now forced to bow before a foreign king who claimed the four corners of the world. The conquest of Elam is not just another victory, it is strategic. The mountains are rich in resources Mesopotamia lacks: copper and tin for bronze stones, for building timber, for construction. By bringing Elam into his orbit, Sargon strengthens the very foundations of his empire, securing the materials needed to feed his army, build his city, and maintain his dominance. But Elam is not easily subdued. Its people are resilient, its terrain difficult. The victory is costly, and rebellions will flare again in later years. Yet the message is clear: even the highlands, even the distant lands beyond the rivers cannot withstand Akkad. This clash also signals something new in the history of warfare. Sumerian kings had long fought each other city against city, with armies numbering in the thousands. Sargon, by contrast, wages imperial campaigns. He does not march only to defend borders or punish rivals. He marches to extend the very idea of empire, to bring distant peoples under a single crown. His wars are no longer local struggles, they are expansions of a world order. You can almost hear the clash of bronze weapons in the valleys of Elam. Akkadian spearmen locked in battle against Elamite warriors, arrows whistling through the air, the cries of men echoing against the stone cliffs. The dust rises, the sun beats down, and amid the chaos stands Sargon directing the fight, his presence as steady as the mountains themselves. When the battle ends, Akkad triumphs. The tribute of Elam metals, stones, timber flows westward to Akkad. In the markets of the capital, merchants marvel at these goods. From the highlands, their wealth a sign of empire's reach. The scribes inscribe tablets proclaiming the victory, ensuring that Sargon's name will echo even in lands beyond Mesopotamia. And yet you sense the fragility beneath the triumph. Conquests bring glory, but each new land added to the empire adds weight to its foundations. Elam will not forget its humiliation. In the years after Sargon's death, the Elamites will rise again, pressing against Akkad's borders, testing the strength of his successors. For now, though the empire stands unchallenged, its borders stretching farther than any before. As you drift in the story, you realize what Sargon has created. He has taken the ancient rivalry of Sumer and Elam and transformed it into something new, not two lands at war, but one land conquered, folded into the growing dominion of Akkad. This is the true mark of empire, to turn neighbors into subjects, rivals into tributaries, enemies into pieces of a larger whole. The clash with Elam reminds us of the scale of Sargon's ambition. To him, the rivers of Mesopotamia are not boundaries, but beginnings. Each horizon conquered reveals another beyond it. The world is wide, and he intends to rule it all. And so as night falls over the mountains of Elam, you hear the quiet sound of Akkadian soldiers setting campfires in conquered valleys, their songs drifting into the cool night air. The stars glitter above them, the same stars the priests of Akkad read as omens. And perhaps in that moment Sargon gazes at the constellations and sees not just the victory of today, but the promise of tomorrow, a world bound together under one crown. Divine kingship. Conquest has brought Sargon glory. Armies bow before him. Governors enforce his decrees. Akkadian spreads as the language of empire. Yet Sargon knows that power gained by the sword must also be sanctified by the gods. For in Mesopotamia, kingship is never just a human office, it is divine. From the earliest days of Sumer, kings had ruled not only as warriors and administrators, but as servants of the gods. Each city-state was the dwelling place of a particular deity, and the king was the god's chosen steward, protecting the city, maintaining the temple, and ensuring offerings were made. But Sargon's empire is something far greater than a single city-state. He cannot be seen as merely the steward of one god's house. He must be the chosen of all gods, the earthly vessel of divine will. And so he turns to Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, of fertility and destruction, whom the Akkadians call Inanna. She has shielded him since the days of Ur-Zababa's plots, when she refused to strike him down and instead embraced him as her favored one. Now, in the height of his reign, Sargon elevates her as patroness of his empire and as the source of his authority. Imagine the ceremonies in Akkad. In the great temple, priests chant hymns to Ishtar, praising her beauty and her ferocity. Statues of the goddess adorned in gold and lapis lazuli gleam in the torchlight. Soldiers dedicate their victories to her name, and Sargon himself proclaims that his rule comes from her favor, that his crown is not merely a human achievement but a divine gift. The chronicles say, Sargon declared, Ishtar granted me the kingship, and I ruled. In these words lies the heart of his strategy. He is no longer just a conqueror by might, he is chosen by heaven. To his people, this is more than politics. In a world where gods decide fates, to be chosen by Ishtar is to be beyond question. If the goddess of war and love stands behind him, then who could resist his victories are her victories. His reign is her will. This idea of divine kingship spreads across his empire. Governors rule in his name because he is chosen of the gods. Soldiers fight with courage because they believe their king is divinely protected. Even priests, though proud of their own city's traditions, cannot deny the force of his claim. For if Ishtar favors him, then resisting him is resisting the goddess herself. You close your eyes and picture Sargon standing before the statue of Ishtar. He pours a libation, offers sacrifices of bulls and rams, and speaks words of devotion. Behind him stand his generals, his governors, his scribes. They bow not only to Sargon, but to the goddess who has placed him upon the throne. The ceremony binds them together, king's subjects and gods, in a sacred order. This marks a shift in Mesopotamian kingship. Where once rulers were city-bound stewards, Sargon becomes something more, a universal king, a ruler whose authority transcends city walls and local temples. He sets a precedent that later rulers will follow. Naram-Sin, his grandson, will go even further, declaring himself a god on earth. But it is Sargon who first lays the foundation, weaving divine legitimacy into the fabric of empire. Of course, not everyone accepts this easily. Some whisper that Sargon overreaches, that his claim of divine favor threatens the balance between gods and men. Some priests in distant cities grumble that their local deities are being overshadowed by Ishtar of Akkad. And in the streets, common folk may wonder quietly whether the gods will tolerate one man claiming such universal favor. Yet Sargon knows how to silence doubt with victory. Each battle won, each rebellion crushed, each tribute delivered to Akkad becomes proof that the gods indeed favor him. Success itself is the strongest argument for divine legitimacy, and so his image grows larger than life. No longer is he remembered only as the orphan of the river or the cupbearer turned king. He is now a figure wrapped in sacred destiny, chosen by Ishtar, sustained by the gods, ruling by divine right. You can feel how this transforms his empire. The governors now act not just as officials, but as extensions of divine authority. The soldiers march not only for pay, but for a king chosen by heaven. Even foreign rulers must reckon with the idea that to resist Sargon is to resist the goddess who favors him. The concept of divine kingship will echo through history. In Mesopotamia, later kings will claim similar favor, each trying to capture the aura of Sargon. In Egypt, pharaohs will be seen as gods on earth. Centuries later, kings and emperors across the world will still wrap their thrones in the mantle of divine will. And it begins here, in the temples of Akkad, with Sargon's claim that Ishtar herself had granted him rule. As you drift with the story, you hear the hymns of priests echoing through the temple halls, the steady rhythm of drums, the cries of worshippers lifting their hands to the goddess. And amid them stands Sargon, a man who has taken his human triumphs and cloaked them in the aura of the divine. It is no longer enough to call him king. He is the chosen of Ishtar. He is the embodiment of heaven's will on earth. He is Sargon the Great, ruler of the four quarters of the world, and now the man whose throne shines with divine light. Rebellions of the cities. The empire of Sargon shines bright. A capital at Akkad, governors spread across conquered cities, soldiers drilled into a permanent army, decrees issued in the new imperial tongue. To his people he proclaims himself chosen of Ishtar, favored of the gods, king of the four quarters of the world. And yet beneath this grandeur unrest stirs. For though Sargon has conquered Sumer, he has not erased its pride. The cities of Uruk, Lagash, and others are ancient, older than Akkad itself, and their people do not forget. Their kings may be gone, their banners lowered, but in the hearts of priests, merchants, and common folk, loyalty to their own traditions burns on. So rebellions flare. The chronicles speak of it plainly. In 1 year, late in Sargon's reign, all the lands rose up against him. The entire web of cities, weary of Akkadian governors, tired of tribute flowing to Akkad, and resentful of foreign rule united in revolt. It is as though the whole of Sumer decided in one breath to test the strength of its emperor. You can imagine the scene. Governors in the provinces sending urgent tablets to Akkad. The people are restless. The temples whisper against you. The soldiers mutter discontent. Then the reports grow darker. The walls are manned. The banners of revolt are raised. The cities have turned against your authority. Most kings faced with rebellion on such a scale would have faltered, but not Sargon. He gathers his army, those 400 men who eat at his table, and marches once more. The campaigns are brutal. From one city to the next, Sargon crushes uprisings, storms walls, captures leaders, and restores order. His soldiers move tirelessly, fighting battle after battle until the rebellion is broken. The chronicles written by Akkadian scribes claim he triumphed everywhere, that no city could stand against him. Perhaps the truth is more complex. Perhaps some victories were harder than remembered, some compromises quietly struck. But the legend is clear: Sargon subdued the lands once more. Still, the very fact that the rebellion happened reveals the fragility of empire. Conquest brings unity by force, but unity is not love. The cities obey Akkad, but they do not embrace it. They submit, but they do not forget their independence. The empire must be constantly defended, its order maintained by soldiers and governors, its stability always at risk. You close your eyes and picture the streets of Uruk during the rebellion. Citizens gather in the market, priests cry out that the gods favor their city. Once more, warriors polish their weapons. Hope surges, perhaps freedom is near. And then the tramp of Akkadian boots is heard. The gates are breached, the rebellion crushed, and silence falls again. For the common people, these cycles of rebellion and suppression bring hardship. Armies trample fields, canals run red with silt and blood, and tribute demands grow heavier. And yet life continues. Farmers still plant barley, merchants still trade, children still play in the shadows of ziggurats. Beneath the weight of empire, the pulse of ordinary life endures. For Sargon, the rebellions are both a threat and a test. Each time he crushes them, he proves anew that the gods favor him. Each victory adds to his legend, showing that even when the world rises against him, he stands firm. The stories say that even in his old age he fought and won battles across the land. Whether exaggerated or not, the image of the aged king still commanding armies becomes part of his myth. But rebellion leaves scars. Each uprising drains resources, weakens loyalty, and reveals how fragile the empire truly is. The more lands he conquers, the more he must defend. The larger his empire grows, the more its weight presses against itself. It is the paradox of empire expansion creates greatness, but also instability. And yet for now, Sargon holds it all together. His standing army ensures swift response, his governors enforce his decrees, and his claim of divine favor strengthens his authority. Each rebellion that flares, he extinguishes. Each city that defies him, he humbles. Still, as you drift deeper into the story, you can sense the tension. The empire is like a bowstring drawn taut, strong, but always in danger of snapping. And though Sargon keeps it steady for now, you know that one day the string will fray. But not yet. Not while the old lion still breathes, not while the conqueror still wields his spear, not while the chosen of Ishtar still commands the armies of Akkad. For now, rebellion is defeated, and the empire of Akkad stands unbroken. The curse of Agade. The empire of Sargon has reached heights never seen before. His banners have touched the Mediterranean and the mountains of Elam. His governors sit in the palaces of conquered kings. His soldiers enforce order from the Gulf to the northern plains. And yet, as the decades pass, whispers grow louder, whispers not of rebellion this time, but of divine anger. For in Mesopotamia the gods are never silent. Every flood, every drought, every storm is a message. And the scribes tell of a story passed down for centuries called the Curse of Agade. The tale is part myth, part memory, and perhaps a reflection of events that unfolded long after Sargon's reign. Yet it clings to his empire as if the people of Mesopotamia could not believe that something so great could fall without the gods themselves turning against it. According to the legend, Sargon, or in some versions his grandson Naram-Sin, offended the great god Enlil, lord of the air, whose temple stood at Nippur. Perhaps it was arrogance, perhaps neglect of offerings, perhaps the audacity of claiming universal kingship. Whatever the reason, Enlil withdrew his favor, and without divine favor no empire could stand. The myth describes how Nippur's temple was abandoned, how the gods turned their faces away, and how calamity descended upon Akkad. Crops failed, fields withered, the earth refused to yield grain, the rivers shrank their waters bitter, armies of enemies rose up, and from the mountains came the Gutians, a wild people who ravaged the land. The curse fell not only on the king, but on the city itself. Agade, the shining capital Sargon had built, once filled with riches and glory, the myth says it was stripped bare its streets, deserted its walls, crumbling its ziggurats, abandoned. Agade, the poem laments, was destroyed as if it had never been. You close your eyes and imagine the contrast. Once Akkad had been filled with merchants shouting their wares, soldiers drilling in the courtyards, scribes etching tablets into clay. Now in the myths telling silence reigns. The market is empty, the palace is a hollow shell. The temple of Ishtar, once alive with song, is dark. The winds whistle through ruined streets. Whether this curse was truly spoken against Sargon in his lifetime or woven later to explain the fall of his dynasty, its meaning is clear. Even the greatest empire is fragile before the will of the gods. The story reflects a deep Mesopotamian truth. To them, no empire fell by chance or human weakness alone. If Akkad crumbled, it must have been because the gods themselves decreed it. The myth is not a rejection of Sargon's greatness, but a reminder of the limits of human ambition. No matter how high a king rises, he must remain in harmony with the divine order. And yet the curse also adds to Sargon's legend. To have angered Enlil, to have commanded an empire so vast that only the gods could bring it down, made him larger than life. His fall in memory becomes as epic as his rise. You can picture Sargon older now, sitting in his palace at Akkad. His hair is silvered, his face lined with years of war and rule. Around him, advisers whisper of unrest. Priests warn of unfavorable omens, and messengers bring news of famines and raids. Perhaps he wonders if the gods who once favored him have now turned their backs. Perhaps he prays to Ishtar, seeking her aid once more. Perhaps he simply endures as he always has, fighting to the end. The curse of Agade is more than just a myth about one city. It is a warning told to future kings: do not grow arrogant, do not neglect the gods, do not believe yourself greater than heaven, for what the gods give they can also take away. Later, rulers of Mesopotamia, Babylonians, Assyrians remembered this tale. Each tried to avoid the fate of Akkad, each claimed to honor the gods, each feared that Enlil's wrath might fall upon them if they overstepped. Yet still, like Sargon, they dreamed of ruling the four quarters of the world. And so as you drift deeper into the story, you hear the echoes of the curse, the cry of priests lamenting the fall of Agade, the silence of abandoned streets, the voice of scribes writing the warning onto clay that no king, however great, can stand without the gods. Whether the curse was true or legend, it endures, and with it Sargon's empire takes on a shadow, a tragic counterpoint to its glory. For every rise carries within it the seeds of its fall. And for Akkad, the fall was so profound that its very city vanished from history, leaving behind only words carved in clay and a legend of divine wrath. The later years. Time passes even for the greatest of kings. The young man once set adrift on a river, the cupbearer who rose to seize a throne, the conqueror who marched to the sea, is now an old man. His hair is silver, his face carved with lines of age, his body worn by decades of campaigning. Yet still Sargon of Akkad does not rest. The chronicles say that in his final years rebellion rose from east to west, that the lands he had conquered turned against him all at once. It was as if the entire world sought to test the resolve of the old lion. 34 cities defied him, 34 banners of revolt rose against his rule. For any other king this would have been the end, but not for Sargon. Even in age he took up his spear. He summoned his army, those thousands of soldiers who had followed him since youth, and he marched once more. Imagine the sight: an elderly king armor strapped across his chest, riding at the head of his army as dust swirls beneath their feet. His voice is not as strong as before, his stride slower, yet his presence is unshaken. One by one the rebellions are crushed. The chronicles boast that he fought 34 battles in a single year and triumphed in them all. Whether the number is literal or poetic, the truth remains. Sargon, even at the end of his life, was a warrior still. You can picture him in those last campaigns, weary but resolute, his generals rallying around him, his soldiers inspired by the sight of their king refusing to yield. In a world where many kings fell in sudden battle or lost their thrones to rivals, Sargon endured. His rule stretched for 55 years, an almost unimaginable span, in ancient Mesopotamia, where kings often reigned for only a handful of seasons. But age brought more than battles. It brought reflection. Perhaps as he sat in his palace at Akkad after campaigns, he thought of the river that had once carried him as an infant, the gardener who had raised him, the palace of Ur-Zababa, where he once poured wine as a servant. Perhaps he thought of the cities he had conquered, the kings he had chained, the empire he had forged from dust. He must also have thought of legacy, for he knew that he could not live forever. His sons and daughters would inherit what he had built, and he hoped they would be strong enough to hold it. Yet he must have sensed the fragility beneath the grandeur. Empires, like men, do not last forever. They rise, they flourish, they falter. Even as he reflected, he continued to act. He strengthened his capital, maintained his governors, commanded his scribes to record his victories on clay so that his name would endure. And endure it did. Thousands of years later, when archaeologists uncovered cuneiform tablets, they read of Sargon's deeds, his battles, his conquests, his rule as king of the four quarters of the world. His story survived long after his city was lost, But in his own time, the later years were heavy. Rebellions did not stop. Famine and hardship pressed upon the land. Priests whispered of unfavorable omens, perhaps recalling the tale of Enlil's anger. And though Sargon triumphed again and again, the strain grew. At last, his long reign ended. The exact year is uncertain, but tradition places it around 2279 BC. The old king, who had lived from the lowest station to the highest throne, was laid to rest. His tomb, like his capital, remains lost. No archaeologist has found it. Yet his memory lingers carved into clay and woven into legend. For his people, his death must have been both sorrow and fear. Sargon had ruled so long his presence had become like the rising sun, steady, inevitable, unchanging. Now, for the first time in half a century, Mesopotamia faced a dawn without him, and yet even as he died, his shadow stretched far into the future. His children and grandchildren would inherit the empire. His grandson Naram-Sin would carry his vision to even greater heights, though not without peril. And the very idea of empire born with Sargon would live on long after Akkad itself had crumbled. You close your eyes and picture his final days. An old man weary from war, sitting on a throne that had once seemed impossible for him to reach. Around him, governors and generals bow. Priests chant hymns to Ishtar. Outside, his soldiers still stand guard, loyal to the end. And in the silence of his last moments, perhaps, Sargon allowed himself one thought that he had risen from nothing and become the first emperor of the world. It is a thought that no curse, no rebellion, no fall of cities could erase. The succession. The death of Sargon marks the end of an era. For 55 years he has been the unshakable center of Mesopotamia, the conqueror, the administrator, the chosen of Ishtar. With him gone, an entire generation that has known no other ruler faces a new and uncertain dawn. Succession in Mesopotamia is always delicate. Kingship is not simply inherited like a piece of property. It is a gift of the gods, a sacred mantle that must rest on worthy shoulders. Sargon's dynasty, however, is prepared. He has sons who are ready to rule. The first to take the throne is Rimush, his younger son. Rimush inherits not only the crown of Akkad, but also the weight of rebellion. For as soon as Sargon is gone, the cities stir again. Uruk and Lagash, still proud of their heritage, seize the moment to rise against Akkadian rule. Perhaps they think that the empire was held together only by the old king's iron will, that with him dead they can reclaim independence. But Rimush proves ruthless. The chronicles describe him crushing revolts with merciless force. In he slaughters thousands. In Elam he defeats armies that sought to cast off Akkadian domination. His inscriptions boast of mountains of corpses of rebels slain without pity. If Sargon balanced his power with divine legitimacy, Rimush leans heavily on fear. You can imagine the sight: Akkadian soldiers storming the streets of rebellious cities, torches in hand, swords, flashing the cries of the defeated, rising into the night. The governors who remain loyal tighten their grip, while others fall, quickly replaced by new officials loyal to the dynasty. Rimush ensures that the empire endures, but his reign is harsh and resentment grows deeper. In time, Rimush himself falls murdered in a palace conspiracy after only 9 years on the throne. The exact details are unclear, but the records hint that court officials, weary of his cruelty, struck him down. His death reminds us that kingship, even in empire, is fragile. The sword of rebellion cuts not only from without, but from within. The crown then passes to Manishtushu, Sargon's elder son. Like his brother, he inherits rebellion. Elam rises again, testing Akkad's strength. But Manishtushu proves a capable warrior leading campaigns into Elam and across the Persian Gulf, perhaps even into the lands of Dilmun, the islands of present-day Bahrain. His victories restore some measure of stability, and under his reign trade flourishes once more. Yet Manishtushu too meets a violent end. After 15 years, he is killed by his own court in another conspiracy. The pattern is clear. The empire held so long by Sargon's charisma and presence strains under his successors. They rule with force, they win battles, but their thrones are never safe. Still, the dynasty is not finished. After Manishtushu's death, the crown passes to Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, and with him the Akkadian Empire reaches a new height and a new peril. But before Naram-Sin's reign begins, pause for a moment on the legacy of succession. Sargon's sons inherited not only his empire but his burdens. The rebellions he had spent a lifetime suppressing flared again and again. The governors he had appointed loyal to him were less loyal to his heirs. The claim of divine favor so strong in his own lifetime was harder for others to wield with equal authority. And yet the dynasty endured. Despite assassinations and conspiracies, despite endless rebellions, Akkad remained united. That in itself was remarkable, for before Sargon no city had managed to hold power over all of Sumer for more than a few years. His empire survived his death, his sons' struggles, and still stood strong enough for his grandson to inherit. You close your eyes and imagine the palace of Akkad in these years. The throne room, once dominated by Sargon's presence, now holds new rulers, younger, harsher, less secure. Guards line the walls, watching not only the doors, but one another, for conspiracies are always near. Scribes record decrees in Akkadian, their hands steady even as whispers of rebellion stir outside the walls. Priests still chant hymns to Ishtar, praying that the goddess will extend her favor to Sargon's heirs. The succession is not peaceful. It is bloody, uncertain, and fraught with danger. But it is real. The dynasty survives and the empire continues. When Sargon died, many must have thought the empire would collapse immediately, and yet it did not. His sons and grandson carried his legacy forward, adapting, ruling, and in their own ways expanding. The dream of empire did not end with him. It endured, at least for a time, through his bloodline. And so the story of succession is not only about fragility, but about endurance. It shows both the weakness of empire without its founder and the surprising strength of the system he created. The river-born orphan had not only conquered cities, he had built a dynasty, one that would shape Mesopotamia for another century. And now, as you drift deeper into the tale, you sense the story turning. For the grandson of Sargon, Naram-Sin, will not simply inherit the empire, he will transform it, taking the mantle of kingship to heights even Sargon had not dared. Naram-Sin, the God King. The torch of empire passes to Naram-Sin, grandson of Sargon, son of Manishtushu. Where Rimush and Manishtushu had struggled to hold together what Sargon built, Naram-Sin seizes the crown with energy, vision, and ambition. Under his hand, the Akkadian Empire reaches its golden age and sets itself on a perilous path. From the start, Naram-Sin faces rebellion. Like his father and uncle, he inherits a kingdom restless under Akkadian rule. But unlike them, he responds not only with force but with brilliance. He campaigns tirelessly, quelling uprisings across Sumer, subduing Elam again, and extending Akkadian influence deeper into the mountains of the Zagros. His armies march farther than before, bringing new lands into the empire's orbit. One of his most famous victories comes against the Lulubi fierce mountain tribes in the Zagros. The story of this campaign is immortalized in a great stone carving the victory stele of Naram-Sin. You can picture it, the king carved larger than his soldiers, towering over them, his helmet crowned with horns, a symbol reserved for the gods. His army climbs a steep mountain slope, trampling the defeated beneath them. The Lulubis, smaller in scale, flee in terror as the Akkadians press onward. It is a bold image and a bold claim. For Naram-Sin does not merely present himself as king, he presents himself as divine. Where his grandfather Sargon had proclaimed himself chosen by Ishtar, Naram-Sin takes the next step. He declares himself a god on earth, the god of Akkad. His horned helmet on the stele is no accident, it is the mark of a deity. His inscriptions speak of him not just as king, but as a divine being equal to the gods themselves. This claim is radical. For centuries, Mesopotamian kings had been stewards of the gods' chosen servants, but never gods in their own right. Naram-Sin breaks with tradition, raising himself to a level once reserved only for the divine. To his supporters, this is a sign of greatness. His victories prove his godlike power. His presence inspires awe. Soldiers believe they march not only for a king, but for a living god. To foreign rulers, the claim sends a message of invincibility. How can one resist a god? But to others, it is dangerous arrogance. The priests of Nippur, guardians of Enlil's temple, whisper that no mortal should dare take the horns of divinity. Some see his claim as blasphemy, an offense to the cosmic order. And in later years, when the empire falters, many will point to Naram-Sin's arrogance as the cause, saying he drew the wrath of the gods upon Akkad. For now, though his reign is brilliant, tribute flows into Akkad from all directions. The empire stretches wider than ever before. Trade flourishes, bringing cedar from Lebanon, silver from Anatolia, copper from the Gulf, and precious stones from the east. The scribes record his deeds, praising him as a conqueror beyond compare. The people of Akkad live in the splendor of empire, their city at the center of the known world. You close your eyes and imagine the scene of his court. Naram-Sin sits on a high throne, adorned with the horned crown of divinity. Governors kneel before him, offering reports from distant provinces. Merchants present treasures gathered from faraway lands. Priests sing hymns in his honor, not only as king, but as god. The air hums with reverence and fear. Yet shadows linger. For every conquest there is resistance. For every tribute there is resentment. And for every claim of divinity there is doubt. The Akkadian Empire, though strong, remains fragile, always strained by its vastness, always tested by its diversity of peoples and traditions. The story of Naram-Sin embodies both the brilliance and the hubris of empire. His reign shows how far Akkad had risen. A dynasty that began with a child set adrift on a river now proclaims itself divine, ruling from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. But it also reveals how close greatness and downfall stand together. For the same arrogance that proclaims godhood can just as easily bring ruin. Later legends, including the Curse of Agade, focus not on Sargon but on Naram-Sin. In these tales, he offends Enlil by plundering the sacred city of Nippur, bringing divine wrath upon Akkad. Whether true or not, the story reflects how deeply Mesopotamians viewed his claim to divinity as dangerous. To raise oneself too high was to invite the gods to strike one down. And yet in his lifetime Naram-Sin is magnificent. His empire shines brighter than ever. His armies march farther. His inscriptions boast louder. His image, carved in stone, looms larger. He is the god-king of Akkad, the inheritor of Sargon's dream, the man who takes it to its fullest height. As you drift with the story, you can almost hear the chant of his soldiers, Naram-Sin, god of Akkad, king of the four quarters. You see his armies climbing the mountains of the Zagros, trampling enemies beneath them. You see his people bowing not only to a king, but to a god who walks among them. But in the quiet spaces you also hear the whispers, the murmurs of priests warning of arrogance, the sighs of subjects weary of tribute and wars, the silence of gods whose favor may not endure forever. The golden age of Akkad is brilliant, dazzling, almost blinding, but it carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. And though Naram-Sin shines as the god-king, the cracks in the empire are already beginning to spread. The fall of Akkad. Every empire shines brightest before the shadows close in. For decades, Akkad has been the beating heart of the world, its banners stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, its rulers crowned not only as kings, but as gods. Yet no empire is eternal. In the reign of Naram-Sin and those who followed him, the foundations of Akkad begin to crack. The first blow comes not from human hands, but from the heavens. The skies grow harsh, the rains fail, and the land between the rivers begins to thirst. Modern scholars believe that around this time a great climate shift struck Mesopotamia. Crops failed. Fields that once yielded barley turned to dust. Famine spread, and with famine came unrest. The chronicles describe this time in sorrowful tones. For 7 years one text laments, the grain did not grow, the earth did not produce. Families went hungry, temples lacked offerings, and the people began to murmur that the gods had abandoned Akkad. Hunger makes rebellion. Provinces that had long paid tribute refused. Governors who once bowed to Akkad defied the crown. The standing army, once fed by the abundance of tribute, now strained to march on empty stomachs. Even the capital itself must have felt the weight, markets barren storage jars, empty priests chanting louder in desperate prayers to the gods. Then came the invaders. From the eastern mountains descended the Gutians, a fierce people who knew little of farming, but much of raiding. To the Akkadians they were wild barbarians, without kingship, without guidance, as one lament called them. Yet, in a time of famine and weakness, their raids struck like hammers. They stormed towns, plundered fields, and toppled garrisons. Again and again Akkad fought them, but the Gutians did not vanish. They swarmed across the land, harrying Akkadian forces, draining the empire's strength. At the same time, the cities of Sumer seized their chance. Uruk and Lagash rose in rebellion once more, determined to cast off the yoke of Akkad. Naram-Sin fought fiercely, and for a time he still triumphed, but the cost was high, and the victories grew fewer. After his death, his successors lacked his brilliance and his iron will. The empire, stretched too far, began to crumble. The myths tell the story through the lens of the gods. The curse of Agade blames Naram-Sin for plundering the temple of Enlil, claiming that the deity cursed Akkad, sending famine, enemies, and ruin. Whether history or allegory, the message is clear. The empire had grown too proud, too arrogant, and now the gods themselves had turned against it. You can imagine the slow unraveling. Akkadian governors once feared driven out of cities by angry crowds. Clay tablets once filled with decrees from Akkad abandoned in broken archives. Soldiers deserting as supplies dwindle. Farmers turning away from fields that no longer yield. The great city of Akkad, once bustling with markets and song growing quieter, its streets cracked with neglect. The fall was not sudden. It was a long, slow decline, a generation watching the glory of empire dim. By around 2150 BC, the Gutians had overrun much of Mesopotamia, and Akkad's supremacy was no more. The Sumerian cities reasserted themselves, and later new powers like Ur would rise to claim dominance. But the empire of Sargon, the first empire, was gone. What became of Akkad itself is a mystery. No ruins have yet been found. Perhaps the city was destroyed by enemies, its bricks scattered. Perhaps the rivers shifted, swallowing it beneath silt and mud. Perhaps it still lies buried, waiting to be uncovered. Whatever its fate, Akkad vanished from the map, leaving behind only memories inscribed in clay and legends told for centuries. The fall of Akkad is not only a tragedy, but a lesson. It shows that empire, however brilliant, rests on fragile ground. Climate, famine, rebellion, invasion, all can undo what armies and governors build. It reminds us that human ambition, even at its greatest, is still bound by forces beyond control. And yet, even in its fall, Akkad left an enduring mark. The idea of empire did not vanish. Later, Mesopotamian dynasties, Ur-Zababa, Babylon, Assyria, would build on Sargon's model. They would remember the glory and the curse, striving to imitate his successes while fearing his failures. Even in ruin, Akkad was a teacher. You close your eyes and picture the ruins of empire, empty fields where armies once marched, silent temples where priests once sang, broken walls where banners once flew, the echo of children's laughter fading from abandoned streets. The empire that claimed the 4 quarters of the world lies still a ghost of its former self. And yet through the silence, one voice endures, the voice of memory. For Sargon's name was never forgotten. His empire may have crumbled, but the idea he forged lived on. And so, though Akkad fell, its shadow stretched far across the centuries. The fall of Akkad is not the end of the story. It is the turning of a page, a reminder that even the greatest empires are mortal. But the dream of Sargon, the dream of empire, would never die. Memory and myth. Akkad has fallen. Its walls crumble, its markets fall silent, its palaces stand empty. The Gutians raid the land, the cities of Sumer reclaim their independence, and new dynasties rise from the dust. Yet even as the empire itself vanishes, the memory of Sargon grows larger, wrapped in stories, myths, and legends. For generations, scribes continue to copy tales of the great conqueror. They write of his rise from humble origins, his battles across the 4 corners of the world, his founding of Akkad, and his 55 years of rule. These stories are not only history, they become myth, shaping the way Mesopotamia remembers its past. One of the most famous is the legend of Sargon, a tale told centuries after his death. In it, his birth is described as mysterious and divine. His mother, a priestess, sets him in a basket of reeds and floats him down the river. The waters carry him until a gardener finds and raises him. From these lowly beginnings, Sargon rises to greatness, chosen by the gods to rule. You recognize echoes of this tale in other stories that come much later. the infant Moses set adrift on the Nile, the twins Romulus and Remus abandoned by the Tiber. Sargon's legend becomes a prototype, a story so powerful that it ripples across cultures and centuries. Other stories tell of his conquests in epic tones. They describe him bathing his weapons in the sea, defeating kings as numerous as stars and ruling lands no other had dreamed of. In these tales he is invincible, a hero larger than life, a figure not only of history, but of destiny. And yet the legends are not all triumphant. The curse of Agade, first told about Naram-Sin, but often connected to Sargon's line, describes how arrogance offended the gods and brought ruin. These stories are warnings. Even the greatest king cannot defy divine order. The myth transforms Sargon's empire into a lesson about hubris, reminding future rulers that the gods giveth and the gods taketh away. You close your eyes and picture a scribe in Babylon centuries after Akkad has crumbled. He sits with clay before him, copying the old tales. As his stylus presses signs into the clay, he preserves Sargon's memory for another generation. Outside his window, the world belongs now to other dynasties, Ur-Babylon, Assyria, but in his words, Sargon still lives, still conquers, still rules. In time, Sargon becomes a symbol. Later, kings invoke his name to legitimize their own rule. Hammurabi of Babylon, Ashurbanipal of Assyria, and many others look back to him as the first model of kingship. They claim his titles echo his boasts and measure themselves against his greatness. To be compared to Sargon is to be placed among the greatest of rulers. The Akkadian language, too, helps preserve his memory. For centuries after his empire's fall, Akkadian remains the language of diplomacy and scholarship across the Near East. Even when Sumerian temples chant their hymns, Akkadian scribes tell their stories, and always the name of Sargon appears. And then there is the question of his city. Akkad itself vanishes, leaving no ruins, no walls, no temples uncovered by archaeologists. It becomes a ghost known only through texts. The mystery deepens the legend, a city once at the center of the world, now swallowed by time. In the absence of ruins, the memory of Sargon's empire becomes even more mythical, a place of wonder and loss. For ordinary people, the memory of Sargon may have been passed in whispers, in tales told by grandfathers to grandchildren. There was once a man who rose from nothing, they might have said, who ruled the four quarters of the world. Whether spoken in pride or sorrow, the name endured. And so Sargon outlived his empire. His body returned to dust, his city lost, his dynasty broken, but his story endured. It was told and retold, transformed from history into legend, from legend into myth, until he became not just a man, but a symbol of kingship itself. You can feel the power of this transformation. Sargon is no longer just the ruler of Akkad. He is the eternal conqueror, the orphan who became king, the one chosen by Ishtar, the first to dream of empire. His name crosses the centuries carried in clay. Tablets echoed in other cultures, inspiring kings and storytellers alike. Even today, when archaeologists read the cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia, Sargon's name appears again and again. He is remembered not only as the first emperor of history, but as a figure who embodies the timeless human drive to reach beyond limits, to dream of greatness, to build something larger than life. As you drift with the story, you hear the echoes of those ancient voices, scribes chanting hymns, storytellers recounting battles, priests warning of curses, kings boasting of his legacy. The city is gone, the empire is gone, but the name remains. Sargon of Akkad, the first emperor, the man who became a myth. Legacy of the First Empire. The story of Sargon of Akkad does not end with the fall of his city, nor with the disappearance of his dynasty. His true legacy lies not in what was lost, but in what was created, an idea so powerful it would echo across thousands of years, the idea of empire. Before Sargon, Mesopotamia was a land of city-states. Uruk, Kish, Lagash, each ruled by its own king, each fiercely protective of its independence. Wars were local, fought over canals or fields, and alliances shifted constantly. Kingship was sacred, but it was bound to the walls of a single city. Sargon changed everything. He showed that it was possible to unite many cities under one crown, to stretch power beyond rivers and horizons, to make kingship not local, but universal. He styled himself King of Sumer and Akkad, King of the Four Quarters of the world. In doing so, he planted the seed of a new political order. From his reign onward, Mesopotamian rulers measured themselves against him. Hammurabi of Babylon centuries later would claim his mantle as lawgiver and unifier. The kings of Assyria would expand upon his vision, ruling with standing armies, and governors calling themselves rulers of the four corners, as Sargon once had. Even Cyrus the Great of Persia, Alexander of Macedon and Caesar of Rome echoed his dream to build empires that spanned horizons, to claim dominion over lands and peoples far beyond their birthplace. The innovations of his reign endured. The standing army became the model for every great military power after him. The system of governors inspired later imperial administrations from Babylonia to Persia. The elevation of Akkadian as the language of power reshaped the cultural landscape of the Near East for centuries, even after his empire's fall. And his story, the legend of the orphan set adrift on the river, who rose to rule the world, carried a universal resonance. It was retold and reshaped across cultures, inspiring tales of Moses, Romulus, and others who began in weakness and ended in greatness. In this way, Sargon's memory traveled not only through history, but through myth, becoming part of humanity's collective imagination. You close your eyes and let the full arc unfold: a child abandoned on the river, rescued by chance, rising to serve a king, seizing a throne, founding a capital, conquering cities, washing his weapons in the sea, proclaiming himself ruler of the world, facing rebellion, enduring into old age, and finally passing into legend. It is a story of triumph and tragedy, of ambition and fragility, of human greatness, bound always by the will of the gods. The ruins of Akkad are still lost. Archaeologists dig in the Mesopotamian plains, searching for traces of the city that once stood at the world's center. Perhaps one day its bricks will be uncovered, its walls revealed, its streets walked again. But even if they never are, the empire lives on in memory, carved into clay, carried in story. The legacy of Sargon is not simply that he conquered, but that he imagined something greater than conquest. He imagined an empire, a system that reached beyond the walls of one city, one king, one people. And by imagining it, he made it real. Even now, thousands of years later, his name carries weight. In every history of Mesopotamia, he stands at the threshold, the first great king, the first empire builder, the first man to dream of ruling the world. His successors may have surpassed him in size or wealth, but none could erase the fact that he was the first. As you drift toward the end of this story, you hear the echoes of Sargon's life. the rush of the river that carried his basket, the clash of bronze weapons on dusty plains, the chants of soldiers swearing loyalty, the hymns of priests proclaiming him chosen of Ishtar, the silence of Akkad's lost ruins, the whisper of clay tablets still speaking his name across millennia, Sargon of Akkad, the orphan who became king, the king who became emperor, the emperor who became a legend. His empire fell, but his idea never died, and so in every empire that rose after him, in every king who claimed the world, in every story of rulers born from nothing, who changed everything, the shadow of Sargon still lingers. The first emperor, the eternal dreamer of empire.